Hey guys, the San Jose Hockey Now podcast is back for our debut, sequel, reboot, whatever you call it. We've got a new co-host and we've got a special first guest, Todd Marchant, Sharks Director of Player Development, here to talk about the draft. Welcome to the new San Jose Hockey Now podcast. This is Sheng Peng with my new co-host, Keegan McNally. Keegan, you might know him as Half Wall Hockey on Twitter and from halfwallhockey.com. There's a dash between the half and the wall. And he also has been writing for San Jose Hockey Now since January. Great in-depth pieces, dives into prospects like Daniil Gushin, William Eklund, a lot of tape in Keegan's article. So great stuff there. So check that out. But welcome aboard, Keegan.
Thank you, Sheng. I'm really excited to be restarting this podcast with you. I think it's going to be an excellent source of information for all things San Jose hockey. So I'm very, very excited. But I think the first bit of business and how we'll probably do a lot of the shows is we'll start off with the news of the week kind of thing, or news of the however long it's been since we've done a podcast. And we'll start off with the newest Patrick Marleau news, if you've got some words, Sheng.
Yeah, and the news is that Patrick is rejoining the Sharks front office. He is a player development coach and hockey operations advisor. And my initial thought hearing the news was first that his job, specifically his duties, are to work with Barracuda players. He's going to be based in San Jose. So work with Barracuda players, work with young Sharks players, right? So this is unlike other development guys like Tommy Wingels and Lucas Pisa, who will be doing a little bit more traveling, I think, and, visiting players at college or their junior teams or overseas and that sort of thing, right? And it sounds like Patrick will be doing that a bit less. Also, too, it sounds like his job kind of duplicates what Mike Ricci is doing. Mike Ricci is there's a development guy, and he is doing Barracuda stuff, and he's doing younger Sharks player stuff too. And so I wondered if Marleau was replacing Ricci or if they were just going to team up. And I checked around on it, and it sounds like it's more of a team up here. So that's great news because everybody loves Reach. And so you're going to have, Todd Marchant as your director of player development, of course. And then you have Ricci and Marleau as sort of your Barracuda Sharks guys. And then you have Tommy Wingels working with the Sharks prospects forwards outside of San Jose. And Lucas Pisa, former defenseman himself, working with Sharks prospects defensemen outside of San Jose. And my second thought about all this too is that is a lot of development people, a lot of people with development in their title. Marchant, seems like it, right? Marchant's your director, and you have 4 development coaches. So I got to check on this, but it's my theory that the Sharks will have the most development people, at least by name, on staff or somewhere around there, which kind of makes sense. In a Doug Wilson era, I think things were run a little bit lean. Doug Jr., for example, handled a lot of the kind of the player development stuff, or he headed it in the same way that Todd Marchant is doing now. But since Mike Ricci has come on, there has been no shortage of hires. Just for example, right, the Sharks have Scott Fitzgerald focusing on the first 2 rounds of the draft, which no other team has. So.
Just the first 2. Yeah.
Just the first 2.
Yeah. And that's really just kind of a credit to the turnover, I guess, because we're used to just hearing from like 2 or 3 guys within the organization as early as last year. And now there's 10 guys there that are, all have different roles and are all taking different parts of this organization. So there's been a lot of turnover and a lot of new names, plus a lot of, old names for Sharks fans that have been watching for a long time. Like myself, I've been a Sharks fan since about 2002, 2003, since I was a child. And hearing these names like Ricci and Marleau and Wingels, like players that I grew up watching, and just now that they're going to be, teaching and growing the next group of Sharks players, it's really awesome from a fan perspective, at least. I think, so congratulations to Patty. It's just one more on a long line of accomplishments for Patrick Marleau. And I think there might be, well, hopefully more Sharks players to come in the future too. So
Joe Thornton.
Joe Thornton is kind of who I'm hoping for as well, just from a selfish standpoint. But we'll see. Joe still might, have some playing days in him. Who knows? But I think the other thing and the elephant in the room, as it were, I guess, as we move towards the draft coming up next week.
Which is the other big thing.
The other big thing, besides the draft that's coming up, is other piece of Sharks news that we need to get into. Is a article that was put out this week that the Erik Karlsson camp and the San Jose camp have come together and kind of decided that a trade is in the future, or they're going to work on getting a trade done. There's been a lot of articles about it and a lot of speculation about who could take on this kind of contract. And I think this is a good place to start, something that we should discuss about potential trade value for Erik Karlsson.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I wanted to say with that, I was working on an article about this, and I decided I'll just say it on the podcast that I don't think that Erik Karlsson is going to get a lot in trade, at least not as much as I see some Sharks fans are hoping for. And three things in particular stand out as to what limits Erik Karlsson's trade value. And number one, Karlsson isn't a highly desirable asset. Now, I understand that Karlsson has just had a 100-point season. He's going to win a Norris Trophy. He's arguably the best defenseman in the world. But it's not just about, when you talk about somebody's desirability as a trade asset, it's not just about what he did this season, right? It's about his play over the last few years, his age, and of course, the big thing with Karlsson, his contract. And he's had one great season in his last 4 years. He's 33, and 3 of his last 5 seasons, his year has been cut short by injuries. And 11.5 million is about 14% of a 83.5 million cap, which is where the cap is now. There aren't many players worth that at all. And so you had all these things combined. Even if the Sharks retain a lot of money, and I've seen this comment that, let's say the Sharks retain 4.5 million, right? Anybody would sign Erik Karlsson to something like a 4-year, $28 million contract. And sure, there are probably a lot of teams that would take that chance, but that's taking the risk of Karlsson for free in terms of extra assets.
Yep.
What we're saying now, what the Sharks want is what they're saying is take on the risky contract. Let's say 4 years, say Sharks retain a lot, 28 million, and we want back a first-round pick, and then we want back a grade B prospect, and throw in a second-round pick while you're at it. And so I'm not really seeing that. So second, because he isn't a highly desirable trade asset, that of course limits the teams that are interested in him. And so if you have a limited number of teams interested, and keep in mind, Karlsson has a full no movement clause, so that can also limit the number of teams that can get into the bidding. If you don't have a number of teams bidding against each other, you're not going to egg on better offers. And third, finally, why I don't think the Sharks are going to get a lot in a Karlsson trade. I think both sides are motivated, like you said, Keegan, to get this deal done, I believe, before the start of the season. The Sharks want to capitalize on Karlsson's positive trade value right now. Remember, what was Karlsson's trade value last season?
About nothing, essentially.
Negative, right?
Negative nothing.
Yeah.
It was, you would be hard pressed to find anyone to take Karlsson at half of his contract.
Yeah. And so we have that. So that's something for Mike Ricci to capitalize on. And also, too, Karlsson himself wants to leave and play for a contender. So both sides are motivated to make a deal. And sure, the Sharks can hold him for the season. And in theory, his value can go up if he keeps playing well. If the cap goes up, it's supposed to go up a few million after next year and a year after that. But the value can also go, kaput if he has one injury. And so anyway,
This is very true. I mean, he's already had such an extensive injury history that it really could happen. This was a
Yeah.
great year for him, but that's definitely possible.
Yeah, this is not the 27, 28-year-old Erik Karlsson that the Sharks
Mhm.
acquired 5 years ago that, was sort of like he was making $6.5 million on the current contract and, kind of close to the peak of his value. But also, too, though, his value was capped by the fact that he had a big extension coming, too. But he's not that valuable. This isn't a 33-year-old player that has been like healthy through and through, every single season and playing
Mhm.
at an elite level for the last 3-4 years. Like, let's say if you traded Brent Burns when he was 33, this isn't the same situation here.
Yeah,
So
and I think that Brent Burns is an interesting example that we'll probably get to in a minute, just in terms of what trade value could look like for this kind of contract.
Right. And so then I think the obvious question is, what kind of trade value might you expect, right, for Erik Karlsson? And so here's some comps, the closest I can find for a Karlsson trade. And there is no perfect comp. I wrote an article recently titled "A Potential Karlsson Trade Could Make Salary Cap History." And few teams retain for that long, 4 years, and nobody retains for that long or for that much. And just to give you an example of that, people are talking about the Sharks retaining maybe 3 million, 4 million of Karlsson's contract. Of course, the Sharks are rumored to want to hold it down to the 2 million area. But anyway, there have been just 15 examples since the introduction of salary retention during 2013 of a team retaining 3 million or more. And they've all been on expiring contracts.
It doesn't bode well.
No, it doesn't bode well. And our closest comp to Karlsson is actually probably, in my research, the Brent Burns trade from last year. And the Sharks retained 34%. They knocked down Burns's 8 million AAV down to 5.3 million for the Canes for 3 more years. So that's, 2.7 million retention. That's a good amount.
Yeah,
But
sorry, go ahead, Sheng.
no, go ahead.
No, so yeah, I was gonna say, even though Brunt was a little bit older when he was traded, it somehow felt like a safer move than trading Erik Karlsson, because Erik Karlsson is
Yeah.
extremely boom or bust at this point in his career.
Well, Brent's very durable, right? Brent's played
Exactly.
how many seasons in a row, right?
Mhm.
And so if you go back to the time of the trade, I think other teams were looking at 3 more years for a 37-year-old defenseman in Burns, who was still considered a top 4 defenseman, very good, but not elite anymore. So Karlsson, there's a wash there, right? Karlsson is younger, but he's a lot more injury prone, but he just put together a Norris Trophy caliber season. So that's, so there's some pluses there for Karlsson. There's some negatives there. But
Mhm.
the end all be all, though, was that there just wasn't a huge market there for Burns. And you also had to throw in, too, that Burns had a limited 3-team trade clause. Karlsson has a no movement.
Yeah, like
So,
even more limiting. And I think Carolina wasn't even on Burns's 3 team, if I remember.
Right. They had so any team that the teams ask of Karlsson wanted to approve. Though I will say, though, I mean, look, the Sharks were really bad last year. They're probably going to be even worse. So there's not a lot
Yeah,
of situations that Karlsson could go to that are going to be worse competitively than San Jose.
this is true.
But
And also, those
it,
teams probably are not super interested in getting Karlsson anyway.
Right. Some of those teams at the bottom layer, yeah. So definitely the Sharks. I know a lot of people are critical of Mike Ricci for the what he got back for Brent Burns, but I think the Sharks got back what they could with the limitations of it. They didn't. I don't think they wanted to keep. They could have said to Brent Burns, "Hey, stay longer, play, start the season with us, play well. Maybe we can get more." They, you know, they I think they did a service to Brent Burns for everything he's done for the franchise. And granted, Karlsson is not at the Burns icon level in San Jose, but Karlsson's been around for a while. He's a veteran. It does show well on your front office if you do right by veterans like that. And the Sharks got back what they could, right? So they got back a young, solid fourth liner in Steven Lawrence, goalie prospect in Makiniemi, who's more of an upside guy. If he hits, if he stays healthy, then you've got something. But he's obviously had injury troubles, not just this past year, but the year before. He's coming off an injury when the Sharks traded for him. And what turned out to be a late 2023 third round pick. So looking back now, Burns obviously had a great year with a great team, and he was on the fringes of the Norris Trophy conversation for the Hurricanes.
Yeah, actually,
And
I want to talk about that for just a minute,
Mhm.
because we were mentioning that the Burns trade itself might be the framework for the Karlsson trade, like the
Yeah,
most likely comp. I think Burns' great year actually lends more to teams maybe wanting to take a
Yeah,
chance.
no, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Like I'm sure a team like Dallas, right, that sorely needs a number 2 after Heiskanen, and as far as I know, Dallas, I believe, was on their list. They obviously have a tons of Sharks connections.
Yep.
Joe Pavelski, Pete DeBoer, who said to he loves his old Sharks. He really does. He loves his old Sharks. He would have taken Brent Burns back in a heartbeat, right? I'm sure the Stars wish they had offered more for Brent Burns. They sure could have used him in the conference finals against Vegas, right? Instead
Yeah.
of that first round pick they sent to the Rangers for Nils Lundqvist, who they scratched
Yeah,
for
they
the
ended up
entirety of the
scratching. I
playoffs.
mean, he's still a prospect, or well, a young player.
Yeah, he's still young,
Yeah.
and he may be, I mean, in 3 years, he better be a much better player than Brent Burns and probably Erik Karlsson, right? That's troubling if he isn't, right?
Yeah,
But
for sure.
if you're thinking about, that's the risk, of course, if you're trying to win now. You take the chances for the now guys like Brent Burns. And I'm sure if Dallas could do a redo, knowing that they were going to make the conference finals,
Yeah.
I you know
They definitely could have had Brent Burns there.
yeah, they could have outdone the Carolina deal, I'm sure, because Carolina, there are some okay pieces there, decent pieces. Love Lawrence, third round pick is a decent pick, but that's a very
McAniemi seemed to be the sticking point, and I think that's the second trade I remember that they were recorded like Greer really being wanting a specific prospect, and I think Shakir Mukhamadullin was the other one that was mentioned in the Timo Meyer trade. So it could have literally just been McAniemi as the sticking point, but
That's true. Yeah, Makemi could have been a big plus. I'm not sure if the Dallas had equivalent goalie prospect, and obviously since Greer has come in, he's kind of reshaped the goaltending already, right? Letting Gaudreau walk, and I don't know if Strauss-Mann is coming back. It's signing Romanov, signing Krona, and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's true. He may have liked Makemi quite a bit, but I don't think Makemi was like a huge part of that deal, just insofar as Makaniemi only played a half of last season. He had a back injury, and
yeah,
even
he had
before
an
that,
injury. He was
yeah.
just kind of like here. Could be a super high upside, and
Yeah, he has that. You want to get somebody that at least has like a chance, even if it's like a small percentage. You don't want to just get a guy that at best he's an AHL goalie.
yeah. But anyways,
So
back to the point.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, but I think you make a good point though that looking at the Stars example from last offseason, maybe the Stars could be into the Karlsson Derby. Though I think Burns all around fit more of their needs, but maybe there's a team that sees something like that and might offer a little bit more. But let's talk about the Edmonton Oilers, just because the Edmonton Oilers were in the Karlsson Derby this year, said to be interested. I've seen some of the sort of the potential offers out there, and I just don't know, or the potential kind of wants that the Sharks had, and I'm just not seeing the reality of that. I've heard names like Evan Bouchard. You're not giving me Evan Bouchard was phenomenal for for the Oilers in the playoffs. Replaced Len Tyson Berry, didn't miss a beat in the playoffs, replacing him on a power play. The Oilers power play in the playoffs was 46%.
Yeah.
And you're not getting Evan Bouchard. You're not getting a first plus Evan Bouchard. And so things like that, your first Evan Bouchard plus other decent stuff for Karlsson, even if you take on some of their bad money, we even heard like the Sharks were asking for 3 first, and maybe they were asking for 3 first, or not exactly 3 first-round picks, but the equivalent value of 3 first-round picks, just like the Sharks last year when they traded for Meyer. They got a first-round pick from New Jersey and Mukhamadullin, who was the equivalent of a first-round value. In a redraft of his year, he would still probably go in the late first round, just like he did in his original draft year.
Yeah, and then they got a second that could be a first plus some other pieces.
Right. So they got some decent stuff. Like, this is for Timo Meyer, though, right?
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
doesn't have the challenges of an Erik Karlsson trade. And so, if you look at other long-term retention deals too, and this may not be all of them, but these are just a few that came to mind. Ekman Larsson in Vancouver in 2019. I know he just got bought out, but at the time it was 6 years retention. And the Coyotes did get a first rounder out of it, but they had to take on 3 bad contracts in Eriksson, Beagle, and Antoine Rousseau. And they also gave up a pretty good player in Connor Garland, too, at the time. Milan Lucic in 2019, 4 years retention, but that was basically just a swap of bad contracts between he and James Neal. I think Calgary got a third round pick out of it, too. Phil Kessel, 2015, 7 years retention, but Phil was a lot younger. And also the Leafs got Kapanen, who was a pretty good prospect back then, and a first, but they gave up a second, so that kind of balances out. So anyway, for Ekman Larsson, Lucic, Kessel, you might also say, though, I think this is one argument that people will have is, well, the Sharks are going to retain a lot more than Arizona on Ekman Larsson, which is, I think, under $1 million. Lucic was 750 maybe. Kessel, I think, was 1.2 the retention. And, Karlsson, we're talking about a lot more retention, but you're talking about a lot more retention because the original salary figure is a whole lot larger. Right? Than Kessel's original contract figure, Lucic's, or Ekman Larsson's. And so I think that all kind of balances out.
Maybe by percentage, Kessel's and Karlsson's would be similar at the time of signing. But you're right. The Karlsson deal is so big for so much money for a player that's a little bit older and also injury prone.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, where we want it to be a huge return because he's very hopefully going to win the Norris Trophy in front of all of us next Monday. And it makes us feel bad if we're going to trade Erik Karlsson for less than he's worth on like a pure ability standpoint. But the way that the NHL works, and we prove it every single year, the trade deadline and on the offseason, is the cap rules everything.
Brent Burns, again, just look at Brent Burns. And
exactly. It's the only thing that teams will finagle or will keep in the back of their mind in every single trade is the cap. Yeah. And that's the way it is, especially in a flat cap era that hasn't raised. I think the problem that we ran into is Edmonton was the big winner. They really, really wanted to push for big push for Erik Karlsson through the trade deadline. And now they got Mattias Ekholm.
Yeah, and they got Bouchard too, who emerged as, like I said, who took a very spot on the power play without missing a beat. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it there anymore.
So I guess my question to you would be, who maybe could be targeting Erik Karlsson?
Well, I just wrote a piece about 10 teams that I kind of played around in my head. I thought maybe, and I did put Edmonton in there just because they were in it in season. I actually have also, I'm working on something. I've asked beat reporters for all of those 10 teams, their thoughts. And let me just say that it was pretty negative. And beat reporters aren't the GMs, but and not that people don't love Erik Karlsson's game, but just the contract, just the age, just all those other things that we talked about. But anyway, so if I were to throw out like best guesses, I mean, I'm going to say Florida only because I don't see how it works with the cap, but Florida just because Jeff Merrick mentioned it, and obviously Merrick is well connected. So okay, so that might be in there. Maybe a Toronto I could see being motivated because they could use another defenseman, and they might have to break up though their kind of core four of forwards though, just to be able to fit in Karlsson's money. But they do have new management there, so maybe Brad Treliving will want maybe a little more balance, right? Instead of all that money concentrated up front. And so Karlsson could present that. I think Dallas, if Dallas is, serious about winning, they need to figure out basically who's going to support Heiskanen. And it's not, I don't think Ryan Suter is as bad as people say he is, but he's not a number 2 defenseman anymore, number 3 defenseman anymore, or anything like that, Yeah. And so, like they should have ponied up for Brent Burns. I don't care what anybody says. Like
they should have. 100%.
Throw in a second round pick,
Yeah,
like you could have beat Carolina's offer in a landslide. Burns lives there. He fits everything that Pete DeBoer wants, and him and Joe Pavelski, like that was sort of like a match made in heaven, and they didn't take the chance.
Yeah, you really have to you have to look at the teams that have the space, the want or the desire for a right shot, offensive D-man, the pieces to acquire them, and then maybe even some bad contracts on their team that they want to get rid of. And the list after you do all of that and are willing to take that risk is very, very small. And
then that Erik would want to go there too. So yeah,
and Karlsson would have to actually want to go there. Say somebody like Buffalo, they've got tons of space. They've got a developing core. They could use a Karlsson, even though they have Dahlin. They could use him, but does Karlsson want to go there at the end of the day.
Right. And also there's a stylistic thing too, right? Because Karlsson, as good as he is, really heavily weighed offensively, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to call him like one-dimensional, but he's very, very heavy offense, right? And usually teams looking to take next step, they want somebody with a little more balance. That's why Brett Pesce, besides the fact that he's making a lot less money than Erik Karlsson, he's younger. There's a lot of demand for him because he also is a more balanced player.
Mm-hmm. I
think you need a specific need for a high octane offensive guy like Karlsson.
I think something you mentioned was the new management group, and I think that's interesting because somebody like Toronto.
Oh, in Toronto, yeah.
Yeah, they've got a new management group that we've seen with Mike Ricci. When the new management comes in, they're not always married to the prospects and the players that were acquired by the prior group. They don't see the same level of value. They might be willing to trade them and try and make a big splash. So
yeah. For what it's worth, too, Dubas was said to be kicking the tires on Karlsson. Thought about it last year, and so maybe some of the scouts that supported Karlsson are still there in Toronto. I don't know.
I wrote a short article on wallhockey.com, basically outlining a Toronto Erik Karlsson trade. And while it is crazy and from the depths of cap friendly armchair GM or basically that kind of thing, it's possible. They've got some contracts they might want to move out, Matt Murray included. Sure, they're trying to find ways to get some space for them. And then they've got a lot of holes in their roster that they're still trying to compete with their big four unless they trade one of them this offseason. They might look into something like that. But the list of teams might be very small for Erik Karlsson. So that's kind of where we're sitting with Erik Karlsson and his news. I think an important thing to keep in mind is the San Jose Sharks are going to be having 12 draft picks at the 2023 NHL draft, at least to start. It's very, very infrequent that a team keeps all of their picks or doesn't move around during the draft. But I think the most interesting part of the offseason, for me at least, is coming up with the draft. I don't know about you, Sheng. More of a free agent guy, more of
honestly, this is sad to say, but the most fun covering a team is the playoffs.
Well, yeah.
So I don't know what that feels like anymore. So I don't think that I'm going to know what that feels like for a while yet. But that is so much fun. So I think my work is better in the playoffs, and I'm just more engaged. Like, look, it's hard to end of the season have to write 500 words trying to tell you why, I don't know, Ivan Chekovich, is going to come in and be a top 6 guy for the Sharks next year. Or looking into the positives of Sasha Chmelevski's game. And he can maybe be a third line center one day. Maybe,
if you squint really hard, it's
a lot of squinting going on, right? I've had to do a lot of squinting in the last 4 years.
So we're hopeful that the upcoming draft kind of leads to a more clear view of prospects. And I think it starts with the Sharks having the number 4 overall pick to start. They also have picks, and I'm just going to run through them very quickly.
Yep.
You can feel free to glaze over it. But 4, 26, 36, 94, 100, 123, 130, 132, 164, 196, 203, and 206. It is an extremely large amount of draft picks for this year, which is credit to Mike Grier coming in and trying to accumulate that amount of picks and recognizing the Sharks may need to rebuild. And Ivan Chekovich and Alexander Chmelevski may not be the ones to do it.
I saw Alexander True a couple of nights ago, Game 7 of the Calder Cup. He looked pretty good.
He did look pretty good. Anyway, so I wanted to bring up a couple of things related to the draft real quick. This week we had Bob McKenzie's ranking. And if you're not familiar with the draft, Bob McKenzie's ranking is kind of like the Bible for draft guides, because it's a culmination of 10 different scouts in the NHL or head scouting department.
Highly ranked, So I think that's part of so maybe the decision makers. So
exactly, it's people that they're actually going to be sitting there at the table, and they kind of make that list, and then they send it to Bob, and Bob collates the list with the other 9 scouts and makes his ranking top 100-ish or so, or top 80, something like that.
96. It was top 96 with some
honorable
mentions. First three rounds.
And I think the all of those players have a high likelihood of being drafted, and it's a good place to start if you're looking for where the Sharks might pick. Craig Button put out a mock draft today, actually. Now reveals when we were actually making this podcast, but that had the Sharks picking Matvei Michkov, as well as Michael Robel, the goaltender, with their 26th pick. So the topic that we're going to bring up for a couple minutes is, who would you pick at 4 and 26, and who do you think is going to get picked, Sheng?
Yeah. Okay. I'll go first. So I wanted to add one rumor I've been hearing, and it's an interesting one. And again, this just a rumor. I want to emphasize that, just a rumor. But
rumor in big bolded letters with an
yes,
underline. Yeah.
But a source told me that, and you guys might have been hearing this already, there's a lot of helium for Will Smith at number 3 to Columbus. And we heard that before, like about a month ago, but then like it quieted down that talk after Erik Karlsson had such an impressive world championships, top center for the men's, the over like the actual adult team, not a juniors team. But anyway, that's what someone told me, that there's a lot of talk about Smith going to Columbus. And so that could really, kind of reset the board. I mean, I still expect it. If you ask me personally, I still expect it to be Bedard, Fantilli, and then Karlsson in that order. And, before leaving Smith or Michkov or somebody like that for the Sharks. But, if you buy into Smith to Columbus, there's even like, I call it credible speculation. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it's speculation from people who are connected.
Yep.
So Merrick suggested that maybe Anaheim takes a swing at Michkov at number 2. And John Hoven, Mayor's Manor, he's very tapped in with the Kings and to some degree with the Ducks too, right? He suggested he's been hearing that the Ducks are going to pick Erik Karlsson at number 2. So I don't want to get Sharks fans too excited, but imagine Bedard, Karlsson, Smith. What does that leave at number 4?
I don't know if that's actually possible.
I don't think so. I just want to put out that I have heard that about Smith. Now that's I can say that on my side that I was told that from a source that I trust. And and I actually read that and even that, if it goes Bedard, Fantilli, and then Smith, I think Sharks fans would be plenty thrilled with Karlsson.
Yeah, 100%. If Karlsson is sitting there, like, I think it's an automatic pick. I don't think there's going to be a question. Just seems like such a San Jose Shark pick in the most recent years with our drafting of Swedish prospects. So it'll be interesting. I think for number 4, my heart of hearts thinks.
Oh, I haven't answered the question yet, but you go first. No, you go first.
Okay. For number 4, I think it'll be Will Smith. I believe that just because it feels right to me. It feels like the type of player that Mike Grier is going to want to acquire to build around.
So you believe the draft will go as most people expect?
Yes.
Bedard, Fantilli, Karlsson. Okay.
I think it'll be Bedard, Fantilli, Karlsson, Smith. I think at the end of the day, there is some speculation that it could be Karlsson or somehow. I think honestly, Columbus might leap off the table if Fantilli's there at 3. I think they might break the draft board to take Fantilli.
Right. Anaheim does something shocking, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But it would be shocking. It's very possible, but shocking. Yeah. I think the answer of who I would pick is a little bit tougher because I'm not Mike Grier. So my job is not to be the person who actually has to make that pick, right? If I was, I'd probably pick Will Smith too. But I personally would pick Michkov if I didn't have my job on the line for it. But that's just mine, if that makes sense. I think Michkov has
that makes sense. Yeah,
higher ceiling, but would be too afraid to pick him, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because I think like if both Smith and Michkov kind of hit on what sort of like their ceilings or whatever, right? Let's say Michkov is Nikita Kucherov, right?
Yep.
And let's say Will Smith is, I don't know, Clayton Keller better, right? Something like that, right?
Yeah,
you're talking about a point per game guy that you're gonna have. Like you're not worried that if he's gonna be there or not 3 to 5 years from now because he's gonna be on your team. That's where he's gonna be. Whereas Michkov, as much talent as he has, like he might hit that, but you may never see him.
Yeah, and there's still a chance that somebody like Will Smith does turn into like a Dylan Strome kind of type that might take a long time to develop.
Oh, sure, sure.
But it's super thought of in his draft year and so productive in his draft year, but then took forever to really develop because of his lack of a well-rounded game. So that's
Yeah,
something
and he's
that
still a little bit a limited player in my opinion. But yeah, you can say the same with Michkov though.
for
Like
sure.
Michkov, there's Nikita Filatov, Nikolai Zhirdev, guys like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I do see your point though. Just for myself, so I think, yeah, I'm going to play it safe for who I think Greer will pick. I think it is going to be Smith. I do think that, a lot of people talked about, well, the Sharks really want to improve their defense, but, there isn't a defenseman in this draft that looks like necessarily that he is in the discussion with Bedard, Fantilli, Karlsson, and
Yep.
Smith. Reinbacher has some helium, and Reinbacher appears like he'll go high, but I don't know if the ceiling is quite agreed upon enough, where I even though he fits more of a positional need, and also just I think how Mike is building the team from the defense out. We've seen with some of the trades that he made at the trade deadline that Reinbacher could fit that, but I think Smith higher ceiling. I think it lands on Smith. I would say that if I were just I'm not just me myself not worried about a job being on the
Not
line.
worried
I
about your
agree with
job.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would take Michkov too, and I know that might be surprising because I've written a lot about Michkov. I wrote one thing about sort of character concerns about Michkov, but I think those character things are real, from what I've heard, and I believe it because I believe my sources that, he hasn't proven to be the best teammate and that sort of thing, but he's only 18 and things like that can get better. And, I actually, it makes me think of one story that, I've kind of heard in the grapevine. I don't know how, like, I feel pretty good about sharing it. So, but let's say that it's not like it wasn't like I was in a room or something like that, right? But if
Okay.
you go back to the 2008 draft, right, and that's
Mhm.
the Erik Karlsson draft. The Kings had the 13th pick. Erik Karlsson went 15th to Ottawa,
Sure.
and I've heard that, and this is actually in support of Michkov, actually. But I think that the argument I'm making is first that character, things like that, the impression you give to people does matter,
For sure.
and second, though, that like you can overcome that. And so at 13, the Kings picked Colton Tuber.
I don't think I remember Colton Tubert playing hockey in the NHL.
He might have
Flavor?
played a
Tubert?
handful of games or
Sure.
whatnot, but anyway, supposedly Dean Lombardi, GM of the Kings, interviewed Karlsson, just was off put by him. Karlsson, we could see has a swagger. Some people say an arrogance, right? That I think can be off putting to some people.
For sure. Yeah.
And so instead of having Drew Doughty and Erik Karlsson from the same draft, too, mind you,
Oh my gosh.
I mean, how many Stanley Cups would the Kings have won if they had Doughty and Karlsson, right, in the
Yep.
first, the early part and mid part of their 20s together on the same blue line, at a discounted price or whatever, right? Yeah, how many? Yeah, I mean, it boggles the mind,
I mean, it was the King's style, I don't think fit with Erik Karlsson very well, but my lord, that is a lot of talent on one blue line.
That's a lot of talent, though, right? Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how Daryl Sutter would have taken Erik Karlsson in his prime.
But even then, you
blue
still
line.
have like you say they wanted to trade him as a super young.
Right,
That's
exactly.
a
Yeah, they wanted to
superstar
trade somebody like that. They could have got something better than Colton Tuber, And so anyway, so that's just an illustration sort of but there's also the flip side too. I don't want to not every sort of like character concern guy or whatever becomes Erik Karlsson or Phil Kessel or has a career like that, right? I mentioned Filatov, I mentioned Zhirdev, guys like that, right? And so that's sort of the danger of it all. Yeah.
For every Erik Karlsson that you get, there's always like a Josh Hosang or a Ryan Merkley or things where
Ryan Merkley, yeah, right.
Yeah, a character concern or some sort of hinting of character concerns comes up and it might or might not be real. So,
but yeah, I'm into fun. My job's not on the line, so yeah, Matvei Michkov for me all the way.
All the way. I think the other interesting thing at 26, and then I think we'll move on to our.
Oh yeah, I forgot my 26 pick. Yeah, let's talk
Yeah, yeah.
26. You
Why
you
don't
go
you do
first.
the 26
Yeah.
first? Because I went
Okay.
first last time.
Oh, okay. You want me to go first?
Yeah, the interesting thing is
Mhm.
Michael Robble, the presumably number one goaltender off
Yep.
the board, has been mocked twice to the Sharks now by
Mhm.
Corey Pronman and by Craig Button. So I think the same question to you: who do you think they pick, and then who would you like to see later on?
So yeah, I actually did an exercise like this for National Hockey Now. We did a mock draft with the editor in chiefs of websites making picks for their team, and also we got draft experts like Chris Peters and Russ Cohen to make picks for the teams that aren't covered under
Mhm.
the National Hockey Now umbrella. And so anyway, I think like a lot of people that I'm not thinking goaltending just because it just a first round pick on a goalie, and there's no like Rabo is a good prospect, but he's not Wallstedt quality prospect at the time. He might turn out to be better, who knows? But Casa at the time, I know Casa it was in the ECHL this past year, but at the time, Casa was drafted ahead of Wallstedt.
Mhm.
Askarov, just any of the he's not a cream of the crop. If you want to talk about the top goalie prospects of the last 10 years, at draft prospects, right?
Yeah,
Rabel isn't in that class, right?
yeah, he's not
And
considered that for sure.
yeah, so I would use the 36 pick on a goalie whoever is left there, which would still be the highest Sharks pick Sharks goaltender pick in history. Their highest is actually 55 a long
Wow.
time ago. Terry Friesen in 1995, I think it was. But anyway, yeah, I would save the 36 for whatever goalie is left there. But anyway, for 26, I think that they'll go defense.
Okay.
And in the mock that we did, I went with Oliver Bonk. And I like Bonk because at least I like Bonk from I think what is Greer or San Jose's perspective, that he's well rounded, he is long, he has reach. I don't think size is like a I think people talk about Mike Greer and size is like a big huge thing,
Mhm.
and I think that's a little bit overblown. I think we've talked about this, right, and we'll talk about this in a second, right, with our guest Todd Marchant, that competitive skill, it's more about compete, and so yeah, so I don't think I don't see so much size for a lot of the potential draft picks. But I think for defense though, and a lot of people want guys who can defend and are long. Because
This
it
is
helps
true.
you defend, right? When you have length, if you can
This is
skate and you
true.
have length, right? And the Sharks have added and have a bunch of players like that. Mukmadou and Hotiak, a Pooley who they just signed, a Knizhov, guys like that kind of fit that profile, right? And so I see
Mhm.
Bonk kind of in that profile, but also can move the puck and defends well too. So good package of tools there. Um, Finally, for who I would pick there, I mean, of course, 26, we don't know who's going to be available, but again, I'm into fun and ceiling. So, Andrew Cristall is it could be a fun guy, right there, right? Even
Lots of
though
stealing, sure.
he has character concerns from what I understand, but like, you know, a lot of talent offensively. I think Bedard called him like the smartest player he's ever played with, right? Or a goalie would be fun too, right?
Something to write about for sure.
Yeah, but I would still stay away from goalie, and I think the
Yeah.
Sharks. I think they will stay away in the first. I could be wrong though. Mike Ricci could make some Sharks history there.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I think it's going to be forward at the first pick, defense at the second pick, and then maybe goaltender at the third pick, unless
Mhm.
there's somebody that very clearly is falling
Right,
and
a guy
maybe
who
they want to
drops,
go.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so they got Andrew Cristall, Riley Heights. Somebody falls into the second round that maybe you can't miss. Hopefully the Sharks take that swing, but everything happens on draft day, and it kind of the chips fall basically, and players that you think are going top 10 end up going 47th. That's just how it works. But I think I'm on a very similar vein. I think that they're going to look for a solid defenseman, and
Okay.
that in that 26 pick. Oliver Bonk would have been a good guess for me as well. I think I have like just a very weird thought that they're going to go for Tanner Molendyke, who is
They have a
just.
lot of though. I mean, not to interrupt you, a Molendyke, right? And
Mhm.
Molendyke, I can say that the Sharks interviewed him at the combine. That's not like a huge deal. The Sharks interviewed 75 players, so
Well,
if I
okay.
was at the combine, they might have interviewed me, you know.
Yeah,
But
one of the best.
yeah, if I
One of the
play
best.
goalie, they
One of
might.
the best skaters in this draft is Tanner Molendyke in terms of defensive skating, and
Yeah.
I think he just has such a high compete level that it seems like a career pick. In
Yeah,
my opinion.
that's a size thing though, because
Mhm.
there are a lot of
He's a
defensemen who
little
might be
smaller.
available by the time Molendyke,
Mhm.
Gulayev, right? Guys kind of in that range, right?
Yeah,
But
Gulyayev and Dragicevic are both like very high.
Dragicevic, yeah.
Yeah, high offensive defensemen that I think the Sharks. I hope, and if I was picking, I would try and pick somebody like that. But I think they're going to go after a more well-rounded defenseman. Somebody
Yeah.
like Bonk
That's
or
another
Molendyke.
disqualifying factor too. So
Yeah,
anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting though. So Molendyke, you like?
I think he's going to be Molendyke or somebody
Mm,
like Molendyke or Bonk, and somehow if
mhm.
Willander falls that far, but he won't. I think it might be them or Dmitry Simishev is an interesting
You
one.
think he'll fall that far?
I don't think so. I think he'll
Mm,
go top 15
yeah,
probably, but
he
yeah,
might be the second Russian picked, right? Yeah,
yeah, Daniil Boot or Dmitry
yeah,
Simishev,
yeah.
or Michkov. I mean, Michkov's going way
First,
higher than
should
both
go
of
first.
them,
Yeah, of all the
but
Russians,
he might be the third or the second.
third, second. Yeah.
But the Russian factor is strong. So if you're sitting there with Dmitry Simishev versus Tom Willander, where Willander is actually coming over and playing in I think Boston College next year.
No, BU. I
BU,
think Smith
sorry.
is.
Oof.
Yeah.
As a
Yeah,
somebody,
David Quinn would be very upset at you right
he
now.
would be
My career
so
too,
mad.
and
Don't
John
let them
McCarthy.
cover your ears. Anyway, he's coming over, right?
Yeah,
Why are you going to be picking Simishev or Boot if somebody who's already coming over? So
right.
we'll see how far the Russians do fall during the draft. But an interesting conversation because this is actually one of the better Russian draft classes in a while. If you just look at Michkov, Boot, Simishev, the Kanserov, like there's a bunch of dudes that are
Mhm.
highly rated in terms of their high upside, basically. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about for the draft
Oh,
segment.
you didn't say though who you would pick though.
Oh, who I would pick?
Yeah, at
Oh,
27,
I would
or
say
yeah.
I have my one guy who I've had for a long time
Mhm.
is Dragicevic.
Okay, Dragicevic. Okay.
Yeah, he's not the. He has a lot of Ryan Merkley esque vibes in
I was gonna
terms.
say Ryan Merkley, but can't skate. Good
Yeah,
pick.
well, but
I'm just
he's
joking. I'm just joking.
Ryan Merkley can't skate, but he's a slightly better defender. I think
Uh-huh.
he's got a better work ethic, and I think
Mhm.
that the upside offensively, the way that he creates offense, is a little bit more translatable than Merkley's was.
Mhm.
So it's like Ryan Merkley skill, but maybe there's a package there that you could mold into a top four
Okay.
defender. So that's my pick, but I understand that there's a lot of concerns with him. So
Yeah.
it's a risky one for sure. All right. So, Sheng, did you watch Mike Greer play as a player? Do you
Sure.
remember? You did.
Yeah.
How would you describe Mike Greer as a player?
Definitely like a lunch pail sort of guy, like and I mean this in the highest way possible, a
Yes.
perfect third liner. Like if you want to build, he didn't win any championships, but if you want to build a contending team or a championship team, and you can't, when you build such a team, you can't put like, think about players from Mike Greer's time. You can't be like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna have Patrick Elias on my third line. That's
Yeah.
not how money works. That's just not how hierarchy
Yeah.
works, right? You're not gonna be able to do that. You got to
Mhm.
fit in a guy that makes about the right money, and in your third line spot, right? So a guy like Mike Greer, great PKer, again, pure competitiveness, work ethic, kind of the things that you think he's looking for. Not just people just say, oh, you just want grit and hitting. No, it's compete. That's what I think about with Mike Greer. Just happen to be big, but
Yeah. I think we're going to get into this on our last segment of the day during our interview with Todd Marchant, but
mhm,
it's the competitive skill aspect, right? It's
sure.
It's the guy who's not just there to punch faces and hit people. That's, you can do that if
Mike
you
has some talent too. Mike went over 15
talent.
goals in a dead puck era too. I think he might have hit 20 in a year too. I'm not sure about that part of it, but
yeah, you want a guy that's going to be able to push play, going to give you everything he's got every single night. And, obviously is good on the PK, that kind of thing. So this segment I'm going to call the Mike Greeriest picks of the draft. And these are the guys that may be picked later on. But just some picks that I've noticed throughout the draft season that might have some Mike Greer vibes. First one on my list is Jaden Lipinski. If you've heard of Jaden Lipinski before. He was ranked 89 by Bob McKenzie, so pretty high. Still in the third round. He's 6'3" 6'4", right shot, center/right winger. He's got everything you're looking for in that Mike Greer-esque player. That high compete level.
Greasy. Greasy. So
greasy,
exactly. The greeriest kind of players. The greasiest kind of players.
Yeah, greasy, gonna get you the puck back off the boards. Can make a few plays. Definitely has a decent shot. May not have the highest skill level, may not have the best handling skill, playmaking, that kind of thing, but is going to help your team every single night. That's my vote, is Jaden Lipinski.
Can I interrupt you really quickly? I just looking over Mike Greer's hockey reference page. Mike top 20 goal, or he got to 20 goals twice, right at 22 times, and he had 15 or more 5 times. So that's not, that's and this is again in a dead puck era for the most part. This is before
and this is also
the new rules of salary cap 2005-06
in limited minutes, and I imagine limited power play minutes as well. It's not like I don't think Mike was out there on the power play every day. Maybe a little bit, but either way, it's somebody that is you want on your team to help you win games. And I've got 2 more forwards. Both of them are a little undersized. So Lipinski, perfect size. That's why he's going probably in the 3rd round. Another one, even ranked higher, but is about 5'8", 5'9", is Denver Barkey. Denver Barkey, ranked number 80 by Bob McKenzie, is kind of like a ball of energy. He's he's willing to throw himself against the boards and through the boards to get the puck back. He'll keep fighting you until he's on the ice and has to tear himself off of the ice to come back and get the puck, kind of guy. Not the most skilled checker, but somebody who's going to put it out there. Also has a little bit of a little bit higher ceiling in terms of skill related to somebody like Lipinski. He's got good hands, good playmaking. Just seems like the competitive skill guy that maybe the Sharks are looking for, even though he's a little undersized.
Sure.
Last one in terms of forwards is Matthew Soto. He's ranked number 130 by CSS. So a little bit later on, maybe in 6th, 7th round. Put up something like 40 points in 50 games this year in his junior season. But similar thing to Barkey. He just is a excellent checker, excellent energy guy, 5'10", 5'11". May not have the best playmaking or, that kind of thing, but he's going to give it all every shift. So those are my 3 guys I'm going to mention in terms of forwards that are my Mike Greer picks of this draft. But
the Greersiest players of them all. So that's a good list. I definitely can see one of them. One of them going to the Sharks.
The Mike Greersiest. And an interesting quote we're going to get from Todd Marchant here in a second is, it doesn't matter if your player is 6'5" or 5'8". You want them to compete until they can't compete anymore. So that's I think a good segue to our interview.
Hey guys, before you jump into the Todd Marchant interview, I just want to let you guys know that we talked with Todd on Monday. The Sharks announced on Friday that they're hiring Patrick Marleau as a development coach. So Todd had that in his back pocket on Monday, but we weren't able to ask him, get him on that. And anyway, so enjoy the interview with Todd. He played over 1,000 games with the New York Rangers, Edmonton Oilers, Columbus Blue Jackets, and Anaheim Ducks. He won a Stanley Cup with the Ducks in 2007. He was hired by the Ducks to be their director of player development in 2011. After over a decade developing talent in Anaheim, last summer, Mike Greer hired him in the same role with the San Jose Sharks. Welcome, Todd Marchant.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And Todd, I just wanted to kind of get started. Todd, I asked the Sharks, in preparation for the draft, I wanted to talk with somebody, kind of in the draft area for the Sharks, and also too, you were also part of the 1991 club recently. There was an interview with Scott Fitzgerald, director of player personnel, and Chris Morehouse, director of amateur scouting, in terms of draft prep. And first thought, though, is that you don't think of a director of player development being so involved in at least the pre-draft and draft process. It's usually thought of player development is, after the draft, you get your hands on the player. So, were you involved a lot in a pre-draft draft in Anaheim? How's your kind of, involvement in the draft different now?
Well, I think you're always involved. These are the players that you're going to have to work with, and a lot of the legwork and stuff is the responsibility of the actual amateur scouts in their area. But there are times when we're out watching one of our own players and we're seeing some of the draft eligible players. So, we have, and a lot of times it's our experience too of having played, in the NHL, and our experience of being in that locker room and having to go through the process can help the amateur scouts, help them make a decision. So, we're not, it's not like we're the ones that are making the decisions, but we help in the process.
Do you, grind tape, watch tape the same way that some of the scouts, amateur scouts do?
We do at times. A lot of times you'll do it just because you want to get a feeling of what the player, what they look like on the ice. But for me, there's nothing better than a live viewing. If you can get there and you see his mannerisms, how they handle themselves when they make a bad pass, or if they make a mistake, or how they handle themselves when they're successful. I mean, all these different things that maybe you can't see, the intangibles that you can't see on video. That's where live viewings, I think, are so important.
And it makes sense too, right? Like if you are, let's say you're going to cover a Sharks prospect, you're going to go visit a Sharks prospect, right? But maybe one of his teammates is a draft eligible person, and maybe you keep an eye on that guy a little bit, right? So you can have some insight for your amateur guys.
Well, for sure. And you also are watching players that are already been drafted, because maybe all of a sudden you're making a trade with another team and you've seen that player 3 or times. Mike will reach out and say, hey, what do you think of this player or this situation? So we kind of see all different aspects. We see the amateur side, but we see the pro side too, because we're in San Jose watching the Barracuda, or we're get a chance to see other teams' top American League players play. So we're kind of involved in all different facets of the process.
Okay. Well, let's jump into the 2023 draft. I know that you can't give away too much specific draft plans, but we got to ask you a few questions. Let's get right to kind of the elephant of the draft room, Matvei Michkov. And it's been said that teams are having trouble scheduling pre-draft meetings with him. So I had to ask you point blank, do you guys have a meeting scheduled with Matvei in Nashville?
I'm not aware of one, but that doesn't mean that we don't have one. Again, a lot of these types of situations are, come from, Mike and Chris Morehouse, our director of amateur scouting. But he's obviously he's a highly talented player. And, if the staff feels as though an interview is warranted, then they'll have one.
And I guess the second question with them, obviously with the Russian war in Ukraine, it's not easy for NHL teams to be there live for KHL games. Has your Russian area scout, Nikolai Latikin, who I understand lives in Ukraine, has he been able to see and interact with Michkov in person this season?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but I'm sure he's done his due diligence, whether it's been in a live viewing or a Zoom meeting, or talking with his representation. I'm sure he's done all his legwork to help us make the best decision possible.
From a more, I guess, development perspective, what might be different about drafting a player now from the KHL from your side of it, where you might not have as much hands-on time with them, and how much say do you have over their development versus their team development coaches already?
It becomes very tricky, not just with Russian players, but even sometimes with Swedish players or European players in general, because, they're being steered in one direction with the team that they play for. And specifically with Russian players, a lot of times they have, longer term contracts. So you don't know when you're actually going to be able to get them over to be able to play for you. And it's always a difficult situation, but you try to do the best you can. I mean, you get 1 week in the summertime at development camp. to be able to forge those relationships, because that's the most important thing. Like for me, last year, not getting hired until after the draft. The draft is like the biggest. It's the first time of communication with the players. If they're at the draft, we're meeting with their families, we're meeting with the players, we're meeting with their agents. We start the process right there. And if they're not there, then we get them out to development camp and we get to see them there. So last year, for us not to be able to do either one kind of put us behind the 8 ball a little bit in that respect. But I thought we picked it up really well. We got to meet all the players. We got to see them all play live several times, and we've got that relationship with the players already, so that when you pick up the phone and call them, it's like you're talking to a peer. It's not like it's someone where you don't necessarily know all about them. And we're constantly learning stuff about these players, and that's what's the most important part of this job, is just being able to communicate with them.
On the development aspect of it, is it kind of an underrated element, working with other teams, say not just KHL, but SHL teams, other teams outside of North America, where you guys have a good relationship with the development coach there, or you just have a confidence in that development program, or again, the coaching staff there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we try to focus on is maybe not so much the technical part of their game. Are they, how do they play in the D zone? What kind of a forecheck are they running? Because every team is going to be a little bit different. But when it comes down to, are you putting in the effort? Are you back checking hard? Are you finishing your checks? Are you doing all the little things well in the game? Are you supporting your teammates? All those are the things that it doesn't matter whether you're playing in the SHL or the CHL or the NCAA. Those coaches are going to want us to support that player in that specific thing, because it's going to make that player better, which is going to make their team better. And that's the other part of our job too, is that we have a really good relationship with all the coaches. We reach out to the coaches before we go to see them play and say, okay, how's Keegan doing today? Are these days, how's his game been? Is it trending up? Is it trending down? Do you need us to make to come in to see him? So there's communication with all their coaches as well, to help make that player the best that he can be.
And this is kind of, I guess, in the same vein, but it was mentioned on the 1991 club town hall recently that the Sharks are looking for competitive skill, in that quote, basically. And we were hoping to get a little bit more of an elaboration on what that means exactly from a player, and what do you look for when you work with a player that clues you in on that kind of thing?
But I mean, competitive skill is kind of a fancy way of saying we want players that compete. We want players that are hard to play against, and it doesn't matter if you're 6'5" or you're 5'8". You can compete, and that's the way Mike played.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way that I played. It was like, okay, maybe we had skill, but we played hard, and that's why we had careers that we did, and that's what teams want. We want players that are going to compete, that are going to be hard to play against, and that's where the competitive skill kind of a comment comes in, because there's all these different things that go into a hockey player, but what goes into a successful hockey player? And we just finished watching the playoffs, and you see a lot of the top end players, they're sacrificing their body, they're doing whatever it takes to be able to win that Stanley Cup. And when we get to that point, that's the type of player that we want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just one more draft question, so get you off the 2023 draft hot seat there, Todd. I have to ask you about the goaltending, and just in general, just how hard is it to draft and predict an 18-year-old goalie compared to other positions? Like even looking like obviously in the playoffs, right? Speaking of ex-Shark, Adin Hill winning a Stanley Cup. You guys recently letting Ben Gaudreau go back in the draft. But then going back to your time in Anaheim, you guys had success with John Gibson in 2011, Frederick Anderson in 2012, Lucas Dosto in 2018. Just thinking back on all that, just like, was that just, your success in Anaheim kind of like, is that a little bit goalies or voodoo, a little bit, a lot of luck there? Or is there something that maybe you guys saw in those goalies that you kind of guessed could translate, and might be we can apply to San Jose this year?
Well, absolutely. I mean, goaltending is a very difficult position to predict, and typically they take a little bit longer than the forwards or the defensemen. And then the other issue is that take for instance Freddie Anderson, who was a European goaltender coming over from Europe to adjusting to the North American style of game, where things happen a lot quicker, as opposed to over on the bigger rink. So there's all these things that kind of go into that process. I mean, Evgeny Nabokov is our director of goaltending. Obviously, he had a great career and is responsible for the recommendations on the goaltenders that we do pick. But then you got to be patient. You got to be patient that it's going to take some time for them to finish out wherever it is that they're playing. Look at Magnus Krona, right? I mean, he just finished his 4 years at Denver, and now he's turned pro, and we're going to see where he ends up with the San Jose Sharks. So they do typically take a little bit longer, but when you watch the goaltenders, you'll see their technique, you'll see the different things that they do well. Do they compete in their crease, or do they back in? Are they that type? So all these different things that kind of go into trying to pick the best player that you can.
Absolutely. And I guess off of the 2023 draft talk or anything like that, and since this is your first season in San Jose as the development coach, has there been any players that you've noticed have had major leaps and bounds improvements this season, or people that you have noticed major development in?
Well, I take a player like Ethan Cardwell. Okay, Ethan went back for his overage, his 20-year-old year, and he had a really good year. He was in the top 5, I think, in just about every 5-on-5 category. He was named the San Jose Prospect of the Year, and I really liked his. We talk about competitive skill. Ethan Cardwell comes up with competitive skill. He plays hard. He competes in all areas. And these are things that we told him that he needed to get better at going back to Barrie. And he checked off every box for us in that respect. So that's why we signed him. And I'm looking forward to seeing specifically what he can do in his first year at pro in San Jose. It's always a big jump from junior to pro, but you know what? If you put the work in and you do the right things, and the other part about this is that when they turn pro is, what they did in junior or in college or in Europe doesn't always translate to pro hockey. So they got to be able to adapt, and they got to, to learn the pro game. And the ones that are willing to listen and learn, they have success quicker. The ones that are a little bit more like, well, this is what I did in junior and it worked for me. Chances are that it takes them a little bit longer to have success because it doesn't translate all the time.
Can I ask you about a prospect of the year? Because that always comes out in the year-end awards, and we in the media, we vote for team MVP. We vote for we vote for a media good guy, just the guy who's the best with the media. We don't vote for prospect of the year though, and so I always wonder kind of what went into it, because they all come out at the same time. The fans assume that we vote for the prospect of the year, and it doesn't seem like it's sort of the consensus top prospect or organization, but so what kind of goes into the thinking when you guys make that selection?
Yeah, so we have a meeting amongst the hockey ops group. Obviously, the player development guys are big part of that. The staff and the Barracuda, our assistant general managers are involved. Everyone kind of has a say as to who they might think fits that or deserves that award. And it was a list of probably 5 or 7 names, and then we whittle it down to about 2 or 3, and then we ultimately pick one. And so it's not just me, or it's not just Joe Will, or it's not just J Mac. It's the entire group of people that all kind of have a say as to who might that player be, and then we make a decision. And Ethan, he fitted the bill this year. He had an outstanding year, and we're really looking forward to see what he can do in pro.
All right, good. I'm tired of getting blamed for that, so thanks for clearing that
up. Yeah, I guess going back to more of like top prospect talk, just from my own personal experience, and also I think Sheng too, watching Eklund throughout the year in the Barracuda, it seemed like he had some improvements throughout his game this year. Is there anything you could speak to that about, or what areas you told him to focus on throughout the year?
Yeah, one area of his game that we really thought that needed to improve was his shot. And there's no question that his shot got better over the summer and throughout the season. And, he was a player that played through being injured pretty much the entire year until the end. And we saw a lot of growth in his game. And that's why he deserved getting called up at the end of the season to get some NHL time. And you look at it and say, okay, but he saw NHL games the year before. He did, but ultimately it ended up going back because he wasn't quite ready to be an everyday NHL player. And when we talk about bringing guys up from the American League to the NHL, we don't want to bring players up just to play. I always say, don't play in the NHL. We want you to come up and have success. And that's a big difference because, you get some players that, you call them up too early and it's just too much. And then you have to worry about their confidence, and you have to worry about all these, well, why didn't I get called up this time? And there's all these things that kind of go into it. But when you do it the right way, this year we were very, very patient with our young players, and we made sure that when they did get a chance that they were ready and deserved it. And, I think we saw Eki, play really well in his games up top after he kind of, in the first couple of games, it was a little tough for him. He struggled a little bit, but then you could see him start to get his feet under him, and then he finished off strong. So I think that just being patient with players, young players like that, makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and it did seem like when he came up the second time for his second NHL stint that he was a little bit more comfortable and felt like he could complete those high skill like passes and plays, that a little bit that split second timing was a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a big step, not only from junior, college, or Europe to the American League, but that's another big jump to the NHL. I mean, like you said, it's a lot faster. The players are bigger and stronger. You make a mistake, a lot of times it's in the back of your net, and those are things that you have to learn in the American League. That's why I talk about having to change your game a little bit to have it be ready for pro hockey. And that's another example of where, you make a mistake in the American League, maybe it goes in your net, 50% of the time, or 25. In the NHL, the number goes to 75. Mm-hmm. And you just got to limit your mistakes, and that's where you learn that is in the American League.
Yeah. And there's always, as this goes on to the next question, but there's always a yearly debate of where these like skilled smaller players, guys under 5'10", 5'11", where they're going to go on draft day. It seems like some of them tend to fall down lists because of their size specifically. So what do you guys look for in smaller players, and what do you focus on in their development to really give them a chance to succeed, knowing that the Sharks have a few of the players like this, like Bordeleau and Gushchin and everything?
Yeah, I think I was a smaller player too. I think if you're a smaller player, you got to excel in a couple other areas. You either have to have elite hockey sense, you have to be an elite skater, or you have to have elite skill. Like you've got to fulfill some of those other categories because of your size. But I'll tell you what, the way the game is played today, there are more smaller players playing in the NHL than it ever has before because of the way that the game is called. You go back 20 or 25 years ago, more than that. I mean, it was barbaric at times with the hooking and the holding. And, someone asked Paul Kariya one time, don't you wish you could play today? And he's like, I don't think so, because everybody is fast now. And the way the game is played, he goes, back then I could get away from players, and that's how I was able to be successful. So the way that the game is called today and played allows for smaller players to have more of an opportunity than they ever had before.
And I wanted to ask you about a couple of your Swedish prospects, one smaller guy and one bigger guy. First, Filip Bystedt, you guys just signed him to his entry-level contract. Can you say what the plan for him is next year? Is he going to play in the SHL, or maybe he'll come over here and compete for NHL or AHL?
Well, his play will determine that. If he comes over, he's coming over to development camp, and that's another opportunity for us to see him play. And he obviously had a great World Juniors, and in the second half of his SHL year was strong as well. So his play determines where he ends up. If he's ready for the NHL, well, then maybe he's going to play in the NHL. And if he's not, maybe he goes back for another year in the SHL and continues to grow and develop. And again, it goes back to not being in a rush. There's no rush with these players. Mm-hmm. When they're ready, they're ready. And that's why I made the comment of just not playing in the NHL, but having success. And we want all of these players to have success.
So that in-between option of the Barracuda and AHL, that's maybe not likely then?
Well, you just never know with these situations. A lot of times, I believe he has a European clause that allows him to go back. But these are discussions that happen between, the agent and Mike. But at the end of the day, we want to do what's right for Filip, right? If the right thing for him is to go back, then he goes back. And if the right thing for him to stay, then it's to stay. But it's always in a communication with not only the player, his agent, and his family, because we want to make sure that we put everybody in the right situation.
Okay. And I also want to ask you about Matthias Havlid too, and just sort of what his immediate future looks like.
Well, he had a tough year, with the injury that he suffered in, October, and then he tried to come back, and then he suffered the injury again. So he missed a lot of time this year. Right now, he's healthy. He's another player that we'll see at development camp. I actually went over to see him play in November, and he had just got hurt right before I got there. So I didn't get a chance to see him play live, but, I got a chance to sit down and talk to him a little bit. And so we want him to have a really good year, be healthy. But the plan is for him to go back to Linköping and play a prominent role on that team.
And then I guess speaking of Havlid in the defense, the Sharks over the past year have obviously drafted Havlid and Jake Furlong, traded for Pierre Mukamadulin, Ahotiuk, and Henry Thrun around the trade deadline. Can you talk about the emphasis on developing the defensive pipeline this year? Because it seems like that's kind of one of Mike's focuses.
Yeah, it was one area that Mike and his staff and us that we looked at the depth that we had at defense, and we felt as though it needed to be we needed more. We needed more quality players, and in the Timo Meier trade, we were able to get Mukamadulin and Ahotiuk in that trade, 2 more defensemen, like you said, and then we were able to get Henry Thrun as on a trade and sign, because he wasn't going to be able to sign. Wasn't going to sign with Anaheim, so you started adding all these players to the mix, and now all of a sudden we got some youth and depth at defense. And and that's where you start. You start with the draft picks, and you start building all these players, and then it would be great if all of them develop into great NHL players, but obviously that doesn't happen. But to be able to have the players, if you don't have the players, then you won't be able to have nobody to develop and to have success. But if you have the players, you have a chance for that to grow into. And I think we saw what Henry was able to accomplish in those games that he played at the end of the season. Muck came over at the end of the year and played some games for the Barracuda. So I think that now if we can get everybody healthy and have a really good summer, it's going to be an exciting time to see all these players, come rookie camp and training camp in September.
Well, obviously, you're not going to close the door on adding even more elite young defensemen, but I wonder, just in general, are you guys feeling pretty satisfied with the defensive pipeline right now, or do you still feel like maybe there are areas that you guys can add in, just in general with the defense?
Never satisfied. You always want more, because it creates competition amongst the players. I mean, if you only have 1 or 2, then all of a sudden it's like, well, I got no one pushing me. But if you've got 5 or 6 or 7, and then, then you've got some competition for spots, and that's what you want. And that's how you get those competitive, skilled players is through, drafting, developing, but then also the competition amongst your peers, because you want the players to be at their best.
And speaking of, somebody that might be in that group of your better defensive prospects, but he had a lot of injuries this past year, so kind of lost his way a little bit. Anything you can say about Gannon Laroque this summer? Should we expect him at development camp? Is he recovered from a couple of injuries that he had last year?
Yeah, Gannon had a tough year. I mean, with having to have double hip surgery. We'll have one, then come back, and then have to have the other one done. Gannon will be at development camp, but he will not be participating on the ice. Yeah, just because the timeline isn't there. I think he had surgery in February, March, I believe. So it's not quite ready for that. But he's on the right track. He's been through this situation before, so he knows what to expect. That's the kind of the positive, I guess, of having to have the other hip done, was that he knows the timeline. He knows the work that has to be done. He's been doing it. He's on the right track for everything. And, we're really looking forward to him having a healthy year this year and turning pro.
Wait, so he's had surgeries on opposite sides of the both hips, basically?
Yeah, he's had both done. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
Yeah, they talked about like Todd Marchant, has had surgery on both knees and having that experience, but you don't hear a lot about players having that 2 hip surgeries.
Hip
And then,
surgeries are the new thing. It's the new thing amongst players. It seems like, at one point it was knees, then it was shoulders, then it was sports hernias, and now it's hips. And
I guess if you identify that injury early enough, you can stop whatever kind of damage could happen if you get in with the right medical staff and everything.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, you don't want it to plague you for years and years and years. Unfortunately, again, that's one area of our game I think that has improved a lot. Is the care that we give these players. That we can make sure that they get see the right doctors and get the right diagnosis and be able to, because you know what, when you try and play through things over time, you end up doing more damage than you need to.
And just to clarify a couple of details, which hip was operated on most recently with Gannon?
I don't remember.
There's only 2 sides. Okay.
Yeah, I'll say if I say the right, I got a 50% chance of getting it right.
But also 50% chance of getting it wrong. So okay, all good.
Wrong. Yeah, so I'll plead the 5th on that one.
Okay, I'll look. We can look that up ourselves. But I do want to ask though about Gannon in particular, though. With obviously what he's dealing with, is there sort of a timeline for him to be back playing again? Then, like, is he going to be ready for rookie face-off, or could it take longer? Because that sounds very serious.
My understanding, barring setbacks, that he'll be ready for rookie camp and training camp. So that's why we're not pushing him at development camp. It's like there's no rush to get there. You miss development camp, but then you still have, you'll be there, be a part of it, but you still have 2 more months or 2.5 months before you have to be ready to go. So he'll be down seeing our docs and our trainers and working out and doing everything he can. And again, that's why I love bringing these guys in, because it's a week we get to spend together. We get to continue to build that bond between the development staff and the players, because then eventually it's a handoff, right? It goes from the amateur guys to us, and then we have them while they're in that process, and then there's a handoff to the American League team or NHL team to the coaches, and we're always still a part of it. Like I remember, my time here in Anaheim where I'd go on a road trip, and I would go in the locker room with the guys, and the players that I'd worked with would come up and say, "Hey, where you been? Who have you seen? They just want to, because that's the relationship, that you were the guy that they saw on a consistent basis. So you build those relationships, and they don't, like the other day, I sent Will Karlsson a text and Shea Theodore a text congratulating him on winning the Stanley Cup, because these are players that I work with, and they both got back, say, thanks, I appreciate it. It was awesome. So it's just, you always have that relationship.
I got to ask you, did you see Willem Karlsson's parade?
His dancing to the ABBA? I saw it.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw it.
Did you know that? Did you know that he always had that in him? His nickname actually is Wild Bill. But I actually dealt with him his first year in Vegas. I covered that team, and he seemed like the most, kind of well-mannered. He might have been the most well-mannered Golden Knight player, that expansion year. But he also has the Wild Bill moniker. So did you see that coming for his, Cup parade celebration?
Our the Swedish scout in Anaheim was the one that gave him the nickname Wild Bill, because he's the farthest thing from Wild Bill.
Right.
But he was always a very quiet, shy kid, and and then obviously getting to Vegas was an opportunity for him to really blossom as a player. So no, I didn't see that in him, but good for him.
Gotcha. I think we have probably one more question for you, and it's there was mention that the scouts do, or the development staff does a lot of video work with prospects throughout the year. And I think Jake Furlong was mentioned. Were there any other ones that were that consistent that you guys worked with remotely?
Yeah, I mean, so Lucas Spiza, who is a former NHL player, is a defenseman, is on our staff, and so is Tommy Wingles, who was a San Jose draft pick. Tommy works with the forwards, and Luca works with the defensemen. And with the ability of having all these different platforms, these video platforms, you're able to pull shifts and games, and every player is a little bit different. Some like to work and do video, and some don't. So you got to kind of figure that part out too. But Jake Furlong was one that he loved doing video work with Luca. So they would spend, every couple weeks or, during the month, he'd break down his shifts, and he would say, okay, here's some of the shifts, the things that you could be better at. And here's some of the shifts that you were really good at. And Jake really liked that feedback. So I kept telling Luca, do it whatever he wants you, whatever he's up for, you might as well do that. So again, it's another layer, whereas another player might say, you know what, I don't like doing that. I'd rather just see you in person. So it's just depending on how, and not that we didn't see Jake in person, because we did, but that was just another layer that Jake enjoyed. So that's why we continue to do that.
Just how excited are you guys for Jake? He seems like a guy that's, risen a little bit from his draft position.
Yeah, he took a big step this year, and especially in the playoffs, I thought he played really well. I thought he was one of, if not their best defenseman in the playoffs. And obviously they went all the way to I think they lost in game 6 to Quebec, who ended up winning the whole thing. So, I mean, Quebec didn't lose. I think they lost 2 games in the entire playoffs in the Quebec playoffs, and both games were against Halifax. So, I mean, they knew that they played against the best team. So, but as far as Jake had a really good year, and we're looking forward to him having another big year next year, and forcing our hand to make a decision on him.
Well, Todd, I want to thank you again so much for the time. I know that you're busy, and a draft coming up next week, development camp, free agency, just a lot going on. So enjoy the last, I guess, couple of days before we get going here. But again, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Todd.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the brand new San Jose Hockey Now podcast. We're going to be here every week. We'll see you next week from Nashville.